Unit 2, which we will be looking at today. I'm going to switch off my camera for the duration of the session, and we'll switch it back on at the end in order to engage with questions if there are any. So welcome everybody to today's session where we will be looking at assessment as an information gathering process. So hopefully, not hopefully, but after today's lecture, being attentive to what we will be engaging with, you will be able to understand the role of information gathering in assessment. Therefore, you will be able to recognize the significance of gathering information to support educational practices and learner development. You will also be able to identify key information gathering techniques, including interviews, which you have already started implementing. We will be having conversations about observations, as well as the curriculum-based assessment that you can make use of. You will also be able to conduct effective intake interviews with parents, which is part of the first assignment, which required you to collect background information on the struggling learner, which you have chosen, and then also apply curriculum-based assessment in order to just track and evaluate the learner progress, as well as reflect on assessment practices, as this part of the exercise is quite critical, given how the different assessment techniques contribute to your understanding and how you will write up the recommendations for further interventions and support of your case child. When it comes to assessment, it is important to recognize that gathering information is a critical part of the entire process. It's not just about assessing a learner's knowledge, but using that data to improve the overall educational experience of your case child. So let me just break down how information gathering plays a vital role in assessment across the assessment process. And I've just highlighted some of the key roles of information gathering in assessment. And the first of that is decision making. Now, gathering information is crucial when it comes to making informed decision. For example, it helps us figure out who needs further support, what specific problems are going on, and how well learners are progressing. And this process in itself is also used to measure effectiveness of educational programs. And then we also have supporting teaching and learning. Now, information gathering during assessment isn't just for measuring learners. It also reflects how well teaching is going. Now, as assessors, in this role that you have undertaken, you can make recommendations to teachers and can use this information to help teachers see if their methods are working and where they need to improve in order to help learners succeed. And then we also have the feedback loop, which is part of the curriculum and the instruction. Yes, Tanya, your hand is up.
Hi,
And
sir. So
childcare,
sorry to interrupt.
no
I'm not
problem.
seeing the presentation again, but I was able to see Dr. Foury's one.
Okay, so do you want me to let me stop sharing and then I will upload again?
Thank
Jacobs,
you.
are you experiencing the same problem or is
Good
your
morning,
hand
sir.
up?
Same problem.
Same problem. Okay, let
Yes.
me just stop sharing and then I will share again. But you guys can download the PowerPoint on Moodle. I've uploaded it. So you are more than welcome to download it from there. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties um, in in terms of viewing the slides. Can you see it now? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, I see thumbs are up. Okay, so it everybody can view it, right? If not, please download the slides underneath Unit 2 on the Moodle platform for your convenience. Okay. So where was I? I was talking about the feedback loop. And that basically speaks about just the making use of the curriculum and the instruction, um, and using that data to give feedback on how well learners are learning and how effective instructions actually is. And now this feedback loop is very essential for ongoing assessment because assessment is an ongoing process. And it is also essential for improving your understanding of the learner's struggle in teaching and the learning environment. And then we also have the mix method. Now, the mix method speaks about the qualitative and the quantitative data that you will be collecting throughout the assessment process. And this is done in order to get a full picture of the learner's performance. Um, for that to happen, we need both qualitative as well as quantitative data. And this is known as the mix different methods, which includes your interviews, which includes learners' curriculum-based assessment, also known as their portfolios, or just direct observation. And this helps us understand not just the numbers, but the context behind the data. So, in actual fact, just gathering information is essential for making better decisions, improving teaching approaches or styles, and also ensuring that assessments are both accurate and effective. Now, in terms of some of the assessment techniques that helps gather useful information, as mentioned, um, there are interviews, there are observations, as well as the curriculum based assessments. And now there are of course both formal and informal ways to gather information about a student's performance. Now, informal assessments don't rely on standardized tests. They include things like the interviews, the observation, as well as the curriculum-based assessments. And these can be either teacher orientated or teacher-created tools, or it can be commercial informed tests. Now, informal assessments are just really practical because they assess learners based on the materials as well as the activities they're already working with in the classroom. And unlike formal tests, they aren't tested on large groups, and there's no norm data to compare the learner's performance to. But they have a lot of benefits. When comparing the assessment techniques, starting with what you have already implemented, and that is interviews. Interviews can be seen as the technique that is quite great in its approach, because it really allows you to understand a learner's experiences, both academically as well as socially, by just talking directly to students. I think there's a student whose mic is on. Is there a student whose mic is on? Hello? Okay. So I'm just going to share the screen again. For some reason, it stopped. Okay. So in terms of the interviews, interviews are a great way to just really understand the experiences as well as the academic and social reality of a learner. And that information is gathered by just directly talking to the learner or to the parents or the guardian or the teacher. It is especially helpful when you're trying to figure out what might be going on with a learner's attitude or behavior or challenges that don't show up in test scores. Now, they offer valuable insights as well into the student's background and the development. Now, parents in their engagement with you would have given you the details of perhaps the learning difficulties in the family, or the learning difficulty that the child might be currently encountering. And in that as well, in the conversation or in the interview, you will find that the parents might also share details about the child's prenatal and birth history, as well as the milestones. That is when they started sitting, walking, or talking, and their overall health, including the illnesses or accidents that they might have encountered. Now, you can also get school history from the parents, school records such as reports, or you can get them from the teachers. You can get, if depending on the context in which you are in, you can get information from the counselors or the psychologists that are part of the school's structure. To get useful information in interviews, it needs to be noted that trust needs to be built between yourself and the parent. It is important not to ask questions that could make them feel perhaps defensive or judge. The goal is to create a cooperative and empathetic atmosphere while staying professional to avoid getting too emotionally involved. because that will affect how you will triangulate the information. So interviews usually just follow semi-structured format, which was provided for you in terms of the expected information which you were expected to elicit from the parents. And so I just want you to note that although the interview process have started, it is not just once off. It is a process that will continue as you engage with your case child. So to get the most out of the interview, the process should go beyond just asking the standard questions that was provided for you in assignment 1 as the assessment process. Now, as the assessment process continue. Now, as a skilled interviewer, will normally gather more than what's directly asked, making the conversation flow naturally while also integrating observation and formal or informal tests. And so you need to be cognizant of that as you go forward in the assessment process, that this is a process that has started, but a process that needs to continue. And then in terms of the observation, now observations are all about just seeing how learners act in real life situations, how they interact with others, how they engage with others, and how they behave in different environments. I came across an interesting quote whilst I was preparing for the session. And the quote said, if I can recall, it said, sometimes you can observe a lot just by watching. And I think that statement holds true because observing learners with learning difficulties is a crucial part of assessing those difficulties. What you notice in the classroom can be really helpful in terms of trying to make the correct recommendation, but also formulating an individual educational plan that draws alongside the need of the learners. Now, some things about a learner are hard to identify just through tests or interviews, but a skilled observer can pick up on important traits and behaviors that show up in the classroom. And observing how a learner behaves can often back up what you have found from other assessments, perhaps. For example, an experienced observer can tell if a child who seems to have trouble hearing is dealing with actual deafness, or if there's something else going on like aphasia or emotional challenges, or perhaps intellectual disability. So observations can be either formal or they can be informal, depending on what you're looking for. Now, they are often used alongside other assessments. They're not used in isolation of everything that you are doing. It is used integratively throughout the entire assessment process in order to give you a complete picture of the student's performance. And this approach is really useful for tracking progress and just adjusting perhaps your approach to assessment based on what you are observing. Um, in regards to observation and motor coordination and development, which is part and parcel of what you will be expected to do, we need to note that motor coordination and development can be at least partially assessed by observing the learner's movement and just watching the learner in the environment. How does the learner approach a writing task? Does he or she engage the entire body while writing? What is the general appearance of the learner's handwriting? How does the learner hold a pencil? Does the learner move continuously during the session or are constantly touching things in the room? Or does the learner expend an inordinate amount of effort in just trying to make the handwriting presentable? And so those are all of the questions that you need to ask yourself when you are observing your case child. And then also in terms of the child's use of language, observation can also help because as you observe, you can ask yourself, is there evidence of speech or a problem in speech articulation? Does the learner have difficulty perhaps finding words? Does the learner possess an inadequate vocabulary? Does the learner speak easily or perhaps excessively? Does the learner use complete sentences or single words and short and partial phrases? Is the sequence of sounds correct in words? And does the learner commit major errors of grammar or syntax? Now, the student's native language is an important consideration, especially within the South African context and in today's culturally diverse school population. And so you ask yourself, does the learner use non-standard English at home? And what is the learner's primary language? What is the learner's language that the learner is being taught in? All of that informs you to better understand the learner and perhaps the difficulty that the learner might be experiencing at this point in time. And then also when it comes to observation, apart from the instructions given to you through the SNAR documents that was shared with you, what you can do as an assessor is also perhaps bring in games, toys, and information activities just to help enrich your observation even further. But also to build a rapport with the learner, as this will help in the relationship building, but also in observing how the learner perhaps engage with games and the toys and the activities that you are presenting. For example, the learner's ability to zip a zipper, to tie their shoelaces, to button up their clothing, or to lock a padlock. All of that will provide clues to fine motor coordination and eye-hand relationships. And then there are games that you can incorporate, such as the phonic bingo or the phonic rummy, which can give you clues on the learner's auditory skills. Now, many of these clues can also help in planning instructional programs that are really best detected by observing the learner's everyday classroom behavior. For example, in reading, one might consider how the learner reacts to unknown words. Does the learner look at the initial consonant and then take a while to guess? Or does the learner attempt to break the word into syllables? Or does the learner try to infer the word from context? All of that informs us in terms of what the possible barrier could be that the learner is currently encountering. And then again, when it comes to observation, there are tools out there that you can make use of and that are easily accessible from the search engine Google, such as the Corners Observation Schedule for parents, teachers. And you can make use of these scales because this will just help you assess a learner's general personal adjustment. And it will also just help shed light on such questions such as how does the learner react to situations and people? What is the student's attitude towards the learning problem? And perhaps also answer questions such as how has the school problem interfered with perhaps aspects of the student's life? And has it drained the learner's energy? Because self-concept or self-esteem is quite important in the learning process. Because for me personally, learning is an emotional process, and therefore it is important to also gauge where the learner is emotionally. Is the learner showing signs of disinterest, or is the learner self-isolating? Now, the teacher observations of learners can also contribute to what you have observed, because their observation can just give more information regarding how perhaps the child is behaving, perhaps in the classroom setting. If you have on your part observe the child in a different setting, such as the playground. And together, the information given by the teacher, as well as the observations done by yourself, will really just give the impression of the the student or the learner in a measurable fashion. And so one can make use of these rating scales that are readily available. And then we also have the curriculum-based assessment. Some people call it the portfolio assessment. And in the CBA, you as the assessor would have to collect a variety of the learner's work that the learner has produced. And these samples are used just to evaluate the learner's current progress and how they are developing. The work can include real examples of what the learner has done in the class And so the term portfolio that is loosely used by others just speaks about the idea of all of the work that learners have produced. And so that will just allow one just to track the achievements of the learner, the gaps perhaps that learners have in certain subjects. And a portfolio might just include things of their daily classwork or their academic tests like spelling or maths tests. And as well as just the behavioral checklists, um, their oral assessments that were done in the classrooms, the marks that they were given for that. All of that plays a significant role in really getting to understand the learner. And of course, all of the work is not done in vain, as there are advantages in terms of the informal assessments that I have spoken of. Now, some of the informal tests, as I've mentioned, are commercially available, or you can create it yourself. And the great thing about using such materials is that they closely just match the expected behaviors of the students. And so here are just some of the guidelines or just the tips of, of, of the informal approach in summary or just as an overview. It focuses on the skills that seem to be lacking, and it starts testing at level that seems about right, and then adjusted if needed to make the material much more easier, so that one can gauge the level of the child in terms of the grade that they are currently in, and perhaps the grade that they are functioning in. And so also just to try to combine the observations of the learner's behavior with the informal testing, as well as just to make sure that to distinguish between the skill gaps and factors like cultural and language, as well as the environment of the child, which really impacts on individuals. Therefore, we need to keep in mind that a learner exists in context. And so always be aware of just the language bias in assessments, particularly in the context like South Africa, where there's not just bilingual children, but also multilingual children. And also remember just to ask about the different language preferences of the child, because they may use different languages in different contexts, depending on the case child that you are currently working with. Now, this brings me to the formal measurements that you will be engaging with as well, apart from the informal measurements, which I have just spoken on. Now, the formal tests are commercially prepared instruments that has been standardized on large groups of learners. Now, when formal tests are given, the strict procedures for administration, scoring, and interpretation are required. And if you have already worked through the SNAR documents that was provided for you, you would have seen that there there there's there are administration procedures, as well as the scoring and interpretation sheets that have been provided within that SNAR document. And so these tests that you are expected to engage with are also called the normed reference, because their scores are derived from the administration to a large group of children. And so a formal test may have the following characteristics. The test is usually available in more than one form, allowing a learner to be examined more than once without obtaining a higher score due to practice. The test is accompanied by a manual that provides direction for administration, scoring, and interpretation, as well as the manual contains grade norms, age norms, and possibly percentile ranks or some form of scaled score, all of which is part of your SNAR document. Now, in terms of the SNAR document that you are expected to engage with and make use of, and which is part of the formal standardized tests in the assessment process, we have the test of mental abilities and mental processes that is part of the process. And the purpose of the general intelligence test is to just assess the global aspects of intelligence. Now, the information from this test just allows you as the assessor to classify a student in terms of their potential. Now, you have been given the drawing screening, as well as the checklist. And so this is just to gauge the age of the child, or just to gauge the age in which the child is functioning. And so this can be administered by a psychologist or by teachers with proper training. And so you are expected to administer that. And we also have the reading test, the general survey type test that is part of the process, which assesses silent reading abilities and the reading level of the child. And the outcome thereof is just to provide just general scores to indicate reading proficiency. And examples of these tests that is part of your SNAR document is the reading competency in LOLT, reading accuracy, the reading errors and miscues, and the comprehension and fluency tests that you are expected to engage in. And then we also have the diagnostic reading test that differs from a general reading test in that it analyzes the processes by which the child attempts to read. It also provides information on how the child reads, rather than simply indicating their reading level. And so, for example, just analyzing specific errors might reveal issues such as poor word attack skills, lack of familiarity with certain phonetic elements, example like vowels and consonant blends, and inadequate sight vocabulary, or a slow reading rate. And these tests, or the focus, will be implemented through the test of reading attitude, assessment of story reading, phonological and phonemic competency in LOLT, as well as the phonic competence in LOLT, which has been provided for you in the SNART document. And then we also have test of other academic skills that is part of the document, which has been provided for you. And these are just some of the general tests that just measures performance in academic subjects like reading, arithmetic, as well as just spelling and grammar. And these tests that are part of your SNART document, they include the mathematics competence, the screening math problem solving skills, as well as the spelling competence in the LOLT. And then we have the motor test that is part of the document as well. And this is just what is in the document is part of the component of motor performance measurement, which looks at gross and fine motor skills, attention and concentration skills, as well as just visual screening rating skills. And then we have the screening test for visual and auditory acuity. And students, what is important to note here is that students, the reason why it is included in the document is because learners with learning disabilities should be checked for sensory issues like vision or hearing problems. And if you are part of Dr. Foury's session earlier today, you will understand the importance of vision and how it plays a huge part in the reading development of reading skills. And so vision and hearing is something that is many times overlooked, but is very important. And so it is included in the SNART documents that have been provided for you, because these screenings can be done by you as the assessor, and you are being trained in this type of test, so that it becomes part of the way of life in terms of how you continue assessing learners. Because if a learner doesn't pass these tests, they should be referred to a specialist, like an eye doctor or audiologist for further evaluation. You will also come to find that after each test, there's an instruction that is given in terms of the action that needs to be taken in regards to the outcome of the particular test. And so I really want to conscientize you about the importance of not just assessing, but also acting on the prompts that has been outlined in the SNART document. Part of the screening test for visual and auditory acuity would be the Webman Auditory Discrimination Test, as well as the visual screening rating scale that is part of the SNART document. And then I also just want to conscientize you of of the GDE screening tool, which is not part of the SNOT documents that have been provided for you. It's also not part of the pre-requirements, but it is a tool that as assessors we need to be aware of, because one of the most important decisions in the assessment process is really figuring out if a student has learning disabilities and qualifies um, for for um, for curriculum differentiation, right? Or a referral to special services. Now, this decision is made by a team of professionals who look at both qualitative as well as quantitative factors. And there's a growing concern among, I think, districts, as well as local schools, underneath the umbrella of the Department of Education, about the increasing number of learners being identified with learning disabilities. And because of this, there's pressure to tighten the criteria for classifying learners as having learning disabilities. And one way to determine, according to GDE, one way to determine eligibility for learning disabilities services is by using a discrepancy score tool. And it is called the accommodation screening tool. I'm sure that by now they have the 2024 revised version. This is just the older version. And you will see here that this tool has been designed to screen foundation phase, intermediate phase, as well as senior phase. And this is a tool that is mostly used within the school context in Johannesburg in order to make application for a child who might be struggling. And this tool in itself, which is built on using a discrepancy score, just helps measure the gap between a learner's actual achievement and their potential. And many schools, I don't know of other districts outside of Johannesburg. I haven't had the privilege of teaching in those spaces, but in Johannesburg, um, you know, many of the schools use the discrepancy score to set the criteria for determining eligibility for these services that are offered by the Department of Education. That could either be curriculum differentiation or concessions or accommodations. Now, it, uh, it is important to just mention, in regards to the document that I was making reference to, that the discrepancy score is the gap between a learner's learning potential and their current achievement. And there are four main ways schools are, or where schools are all experts suggest calculating the score. We're comparing the learner's performance to grade level, looking at perhaps the difference between potential and actual achievement based on grade or age scores, and also just comparing standard scores and using regression analysis. And you will find that in that document that each method has its own pros and and its own cons. However, It is a tool that can be used in order to help us understand the struggles the learner might be having. I also want us to be very conscious of the fact that throughout the process, errors can occur. And these errors can occur due to inappropriate paradigmatic lens or the type of questions asked, or it can occur in regards to how you choose to integrate the data. Therefore, it is important to triangulate all of the information that you have gathered through the various techniques such as interviews, observations, as well as the curriculum-based assessments, both formal and informal assessments are very important to you as the assessor in order to make an informed decision and to support the learner which you have chosen to work with. And so that brings me to the close of my session. And I do want to encourage you to also perhaps make use of the reference lists provided that informed today's session. If you would like to dive into some of the information shared, if you want to dive deeper into it, please do consult the resources that has been provided. And on that note, I am going to stop. Doc Fori, if you could please stop the recording before I give an opportunity. If there are any questions, to engage with questions, I have about 4 minutes. If there are no questions, then we can stop the session right here, and you can have a 4-minute break before your next session